So we are going to transition now into the final session of the day, and quite frankly, every now and then Margaret will surprise me and say, you know, what do you think about? And I guess it was maybe sometime late last year, early this year, she came up with the idea, you know, we really ought to look at what the automobile industry is doing, because there may be some real parallels to what's going on in the aviation world. And so she and Al Ceason on our staff went out and did a site visit, and we were able to convince a few of the automotive people to come to DC today to share some of the work that they're doing that we thought would be a great way to end the programming, to hear a bit about autonomous autos. I know that it's a very, very fascinating topic. It's definitely been written up quite a bit in the press, or you've seen it in news reports. And so with us today, we have Michelle Mueller, Colin Castle, and Brian Buds. Brian and I, by the way, he's an aviation guy. He and I used to work together at the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, so it's great to be reconnected with him. So with that, I think that you guys will manage how you want to do your presentations, but I really do think that we should give them a round of applause and a warm aviation welcome.
Yeah, so I will start. Again, thank you very much. I'm Michelle Mueller. I work for the Michigan Department of Transportation in our connected and automated vehicle space. I am not a podium speaker, so if you guys can bear with me. We are happy to come and share with this group what we're doing in Michigan in the connected and automated vehicle space. I'll cover some of the logistics of our deployments that we're doing, as well as partnerships, and then Colin will get into more of the testing facilities we have in Michigan in this space, as well as legislation that has passed, which I'm sure is of interest to you guys as well. And then Brian will get into some of our aviation side for MDOT and we'll tie it all together at the end. And we're happy to take questions at the end, and we'll be here afterwards. I do know that we are between you and a open bar reception, from what I understand. So that's always the interesting place to be. So we'll walk through. Again, if you have questions, we're happy to share those. Let me grab a slide clicker here. So with that, we have launched a Planet M brand. You may or may not have seen it somewhere. I do know that there's many TV advertisements and radio advertisements that happen here in the DC area related to that. So Planet M is really is our mobility brand in Michigan. So for those of you that have heard of Pure Michigan, which I'm sure all of you have, that is our travel and tourism brand in Michigan, where Planet M is our mobility brand. So throughout the efforts over the years, we identified that we needed to brand the work we're doing, and it has really honestly taken off like wildfire, which is good for us. So how many of you know what connected and automated vehicles are? Do we have? Okay, so I'll give a quick just synopsis of that. So a connected vehicle is a vehicle that it's two elements to it. One is connected to other vehicles, so it's got communication and interaction with other vehicles on the road and in different areas. And then also the automated vehicle is a vehicle that is taking over some of the driving mechanisms or behaviors that a human would actually do. And take that over, but it is, we call it considered automated, that it is also connected. So in context, it's not just operating in and amongst itself going down the road. It's actually talking to infrastructure assets, could be traffic signals, traffic signs, guardrail, things like that, as well as other vehicles that are traveling on the road with it. So it's not just operating in its very own space. So Michigan leads. We're very happy to say that we lead the country in the connected and automated vehicle space with our deployments and our partnerships that are going. So as you can see from here, we have the largest R&D facilities and jobs actually across the country. So there's a lot of the auto manufacturer suppliers that are located and based centrally in Michigan. which is, as we get to some of the maps, you'll see the concentration in Southeast Michigan area, because that's where a lot of that is happening. We are known for the auto capital for that reason, so it's very fitting that this technology is developed there. So this is just a quick snapshot graphic, not going to bore you with the details of it, but the important part to us, as you can see in Michigan, is where all of it, large deployments and numbers are actually happening. So this was collected. We did not put this together on our own behalf. We actually was done not by us. The deployments were gathered based on what's happening across the country, and these are the numbers that came in within this space. So this shows our deployments. Again, for those of you who may or may not be familiar with Michigan, this is Southeast Michigan area, so Detroit area, extending up towards Port Huron and out towards Lansing. So what this shows is those areas that we have infrastructure that is connected, means we have deployments on that infrastructure that is able to communicate with other, with vehicles. And then throughout the years, out to 2023, you can see the extensive deployments that we have. So this extends into our counties. So we do a lot of work. I'll get into some of the partnerships, but we also do an extensive amount of work with our local agencies. So that would be our county road commissions, our cities, villages, and different areas. And we have one particular county that's doing a very large deployment as well, and on county roads. And this is in Macomb County. So you can see, based on the coloring on that map, they're in process right now of letting a job to deploy on all of this infrastructure as well. So this infrastructure, both for state agencies as well as counties, is not only used for the passenger vehicles, it's also used, we just did, actually last week, we launched a new project we did that involved transit, so signal priority and preemption for moving transit and emergency responder vehicles through intersections. So I touched on these. The key ones, obviously signals are a huge infrastructure component for us, as it is many states. And interaction and understanding of those with the vehicles is very important. Data is a big subject. I'm sure data is a big subject to you guys as well. In your space, there's a lot of conversation about how that data is collected, what it's used for, where it's housed, and how do you pool it all together and utilize it and send it back out to those areas that need it. And then our fleet, we have some of our fleet vehicles that are instrumented with technology today, and we're continuing to expand that. So what that does for us is it allows us to get information from our fleet vehicles that are already on the roads doing their daily jobs, and be able to bring that data in to give us, the vehicles we have now are looking at things such as pavement condition information. We can tell, we've got our snow plows, trucks that are instrumented in some of the areas, so we can tell whether they're salting, blades up, blades down, information like that, which gives us valuable asset information of where, what's freezing where, what exactly current conditions are. So some of the partnerships that we've done are pretty significant in the space. We've partnered, and we continue to partner with General Motors. We did some deployments with them at signalized intersections, which was the first in the country. We did a project last summer with 3M, and we had a live work zone on Interstate 75, where we actually put up some devices. I have some pictures in a couple slides that will, I'll dig more into that and explain that too, because I think that would be of interest. And then we also do quite a bit of work with the US Army. TARDEC is actually based in Michigan as well. So we did once about 2016, 17, then continued in 17. We did some platooning testing with the US Army TARDEC. And I-69, we tested their, this was the actual footage from the testing. And what the first phase did was looked at communications between their trucks, and if they could use, they obviously have their military devices and radios, but if they could use commercially available devices, and what that difference really was. Did they see a difference in the military grade of that technology compared to what more freight companies would be using? And then last summer, we actually tested with one of their last vehicles being in automated mode, and tested across the Blue Water Bridge, which actually connects Port Huron, Michigan, over to Sarnia in Canada. So we did testing between the two countries. with platooning. This are some pictures from the 3M project I was talking about. So what this is, these are pictures. We started with just looking at, can we actually bring the information from the automated vehicle back in, and we used a laptop computer, which you see, and then we added a partner to the project, and we actually brought it into the vehicle interface, which is the other picture you see there. So what did this look like? What this looked like was we took actual road construction signs, which everybody's very familiar with, especially in Michigan, and construction barrels, and we worked with 3M. They made a 2D barcode, and they embedded that in the sign, so that as the human driver, you would see, in this case, say a sign that said road work ahead, or our injure killer worker sign, and as a human driving down, you would see that sign, whereas the automated vehicles that were out there testing could read the barcode that was embedded on that sign. And we looked at is there any interferences to that based on where they were placed, based on did it have to see the full actual barcode to read and understand what it was, or could it have some obstruction to that and still be able to see. Then we moved, we tested pavement markings on that project with automated vehicles, and then we also tested our worker vests. So why is it important to us? It's very important to us because we have safety of our workers. Unfortunately, not only us, but our contractors also have workers who get hit. So this is really looking at, can the vehicles pick up that detection of that vest if they're behind a truck, if they're performing different operations. And we tested both in daylight conditions as well as night. So this one was, we partnered, as you can see, with Magna and Continental in this picture. So our governor had an idea last auto show, so a year ago this past January, and said, well, geez, we should test automated vehicles across the different country, between the two countries. So we set out, brought some partners in, and they actually drove about 97% of, I forget how many miles total it was, a significant drive through the tunnel. They went up through Canada, back across Blue Water Bridge in Port Huron out to Traverse City, Michigan. And they did 97% of that drive in automated mode in those vehicles. No issues. It went very successfully, and they continue to test in Michigan. And like I said, Colin will get into some of the legislation that we have that legally allows that to be done. So they are fully operational in Michigan. If you know, sometimes you can tell, and you can see if you know what the vehicles are. And sometimes you wouldn't know because they still have a driver in the vehicle, but they are driving in automated mode. So why, people ask, well, why Michigan? These are good reasons of why Michigan. We have all of these things here that we supply and provide to our partners. We bring and attract a lot of business. We work very well hand in hand with our Michigan Economic Development Group, and they do business attraction, and we partner up, and we've got the facilities here both in a test environment and a live environment within Michigan to actually provide a great place for this to happen. So with that, I will let Colin get into some of the legislation issues, which I'm sure are of interest.
Yeah, all right, thanks, Michelle. So I'm going to talk about some of the enabling legislation that really allows for some of this autonomous vehicle testing to happen in Michigan. So just for some background, Michigan's had a pretty long history of testing or allowing testing of advanced vehicle technologies within the state for a number of years. So previously there was legislation in place that was called the manufacturer's plate, which allowed for OEMs and tier 1 suppliers to get this plate, which gave them additional flexibility around testing certain new technologies that weren't necessarily part of FMVSS standards at the time, so Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards. And so at any one time within the state, there's approximately 35,000 vehicles of this type that are traveling around the state that could be testing all types of new technologies, and particularly one of the high-end use cases that's being tested a lot now is autonomous type technology, and that could be all different types of levels of automation, all the way up to fully driverless operation, which isn't happening as much on live roads. That's more in isolated test facilities, which I'll talk about, but the Michigan current legislation allows for fully driverless operation at any time on Michigan roads if it meets the federal motor vehicle safety standards. So these bills were passed in 2016, and I'll just talk through kind of the 6 major aspects of the legislation and why it really allows for a very permissive allowance of testing within the state. So the first part of this Public Act 332 eliminated a test-only restriction that was currently in the legislation. So previously, within this manufacturer's plate legislation, it was very specific to they were only allowing for testing, not full operation. And one of the things that I want to mention here is previously there was language about needing a driver in the vehicle. That requirement has been removed from the legislation. And so if a vehicle manufacturer could develop a vehicle that meets full federal safety standards, it's fully allowable for that vehicle to operate on Michigan roads at any time within the state. The next piece kind of talks to some of the things that you see, for example, the U.S. Army TARDEC interested in testing, other freight companies looking at, is the idea of truck platooning. So truck platooning is the idea that you could have multiple vehicles essentially running similar, kind of like a train type of setup, where you have lateral and longitudinal control to allow for them to have safe following distances or close following distances to save on things like fuel economy, but then also take over some of the driving functions of the following vehicles. And so what this did is it really took the Michigan Vehicle Code, which had very strict restrictions around how closely vehicles could follow one another, and it relaxed those requirements as long as connectivity and sensors were involved in that operation. And so what you saw with the U.S. Army TARDEC test is you had 5 vehicles. The first one was driven by a human driver. The next 3 vehicles were level 2 automation. So essentially all of the steering functions and the throttling functions were being handled by by the vehicle itself. And then the fourth or the fifth vehicle in that was level 4 automation, which was autonomous with the need for potentially, an operator to take over in certain circumstances. So this legislation allows for that to occur in Michigan, and we're seeing a lot of interest of companies taking advantage of this. The next one was around the idea of automated vehicle networks. So there was a lot of interest in the mobility as a service types of companies being able to connect directly to consumers, through applications and things, but in fully automated mode, meaning fully driverless operations or with a driver, but the vehicle's operating in an automated mode. And so it was very important that there was legislation set up specifically for these types of applications. But then I'll also talk about a little bit later that there's also specific legislation around OEM and supplier owned fleets of vehicles that could be also operated in automated mode as well. This next one is talking about the Council on Future Mobility. So one of the things that we noticed, particularly in the automated vehicle space, is there's a whole lot of folks within the ecosystem that need to have conversations around how policy and legislation impact the ability for these vehicles to be tested, operated on public roads. And so the Council on Future Mobility was established to essentially take representatives from multiple subject matter areas within autonomous vehicles. So for example, state government, like a DOT, you could talk about the insurance industry, OEMs, suppliers, to be able to collaborate, talk about the current legislative framework in the state of Michigan, but then be able to carry a message forward to explain to our legislature how these types of policies really impact, either positively or negatively, the way that these types of systems are tested and operated. The next one, as I mentioned earlier, was around specific standards for SAVE projects. The acronym stands for Safe Autonomous Vehicles, but really the idea is that OEMs or suppliers could have their own fleets of autonomous vehicles that they control, operate, and they're legally allowed to operate and connect to consumers within the state of Michigan. The next one is the American Center for Mobility. So I'm going to touch on, we've talked a lot about on-road testing and operation. I'm also going to talk about how the ability to use kind of closed track facilities also impact, the way that these vehicles are tested within the state of Michigan. But the American Center for Mobility, for those of you who aren't familiar, the Willow Run bomber plant that was in southeast Michigan in Ypsilanti, which was previously used for B-24 bombers, had previously been decommissioned. The site had been kind of leveled. It was more of a brownfield type of setup, and the state of Michigan decided that it would be great to be able to repurpose that into something new and innovative, and so the American Center for Mobility was established, which really the concept is around being able to set up a large-scale test facility that manufacturers can come in and particularly look at developing voluntary standards around automation and connectivity. It's one of the things that we feel, at least from our interaction with the automotive kind of sector, is that there's a weak spot there. And so I'll talk specifically about kind of what ACM looks like and where we're going in support of that. This was in regards to protection for mechanics, so this ensured that any mechanic acting in compliance with the technology would not be exposed to additional liability. So I'll talk about two facilities real quick, and then I'll hand it over to Brian. So if you've ever heard of M-City, this is a 32-acre test facility that was built on the University of Michigan's campus. And the idea here is that this is a closed-track facility that has multiple types of real-world attributes that an autonomous vehicle or connected vehicle may experience in a daily drive. So you have traffic circles, roundabouts, simulated downtown areas, parking configurations, freeway entrance and exit ramps. And what this allows for, the OEMs, the suppliers, the tech companies to do is having a very closed facility that they can essentially rent through a membership to be able to test multiple types of use cases and scenarios in a very isolated, small type of facility. It gives us a great opportunity as an infrastructure owner-operator to see how different decisions that we're making from a lighting perspective, a lane marking perspective, connectivity to our infrastructure. It gives us a great opportunity to have that interaction with the folks that are developing these technologies to see, as we make different decisions in regards to our infrastructure, how that either positively or negatively impacts the way that these vehicles can operate. So it's a really interesting collaboration. There's 20 leadership circle members that are, that communicate collaboratively, pre-competitively on a regular basis to talk about how this facility can be utilized to kind of move the industry forward. And then finally, the American Center for Mobility, as I said earlier, this is one of the 10 federally designated automated vehicle test facilities throughout the country. It sits on the old Willow Run plant, and essentially it's an expansion of the footprint that you see at M-City. So you see M-City, it's on 32 acres. This gives us a much larger opportunity to allow for automated vehicles to test things like high-speed loops, multiple flyover ramps, a lot of scenarios that you couldn't test at M-City. You don't necessarily want to test in an open road network at this time, but this facility is going to be really, really great to allow for companies to test and operate these technologies. And like I said, their core business is around the idea that some of these technologies need to be tested and validated, and voluntary standards need to be developed, and so that's the concept here. You can see that there's 15 universities and colleges and institutes at the bottom there. They've actually created a academic consortium which allows for kind of that new wave of talent to be able to support some of the research efforts at the facility as well. So, and the last thing I'm going to touch on real quick, and I already talked about it a little bit, is the Michigan Council on Future Mobility. So you can see all the companies at the bottom there, and this is really, really important to make sure that when Michigan's enacting legislation that we're not so far off base, and we really have a conduit to continue to convey to our legislature how our laws and regulations impact the way that these technologies continue to evolve within the state. So with that, geez, another slide here. And the last thing I'll talk about real quick is that this is not just a single jurisdictional problem. So the state of Michigan is going to have similar problems to Ohio, similar problems to Pennsylvania. And so one of the things that we've done is set up the Smart Belt Coalition, which is really looking at a couple locations, for example, in Detroit, smart cities in Columbus, some of the AV testing that's happening in Pennsylvania within, at Pittsburgh, and looking at how we can collaborate and not recreate the wheel multiple times. How do we enact legislation that supports multi-state kind of operation of these vehicles? So with that, I will hand it over to Brian, and he's going to cover some of the UAS environment within the state of Michigan.
All right, hello everybody. We've got 5 minutes, so hang tough. I guess just before we get started, I want to say thank you to RTCA for inviting us here. As a former DC guy, I've been to a lot of these conferences, and I think we really appreciate the opportunity to bring the perspective of a state to a national conference, so we appreciate that. Thank you. I'm just going to run you through real quick some of the UAS things going on in the state of Michigan. Part of this is our UAS integration pilot program pitch, so bear with me through that. We obviously didn't get selected, but we're going to keep pushing on it. So in 2015, this was sort of the landscape of UAS in Michigan. We had issues with UAS dropping things into prisons that caught a lot of national attention. Our state police, rightfully so, have been a big leader in the securing a certificate of authorization for law enforcement. And there's been issues with UAS flights around our state capital. So that was sort of the focus of our discussion in the state about restrictions and fear and all that sort of thing. So initially maybe didn't start out so good, which led to the creation from the legislature and the governor's office of a Michigan Unmanned Aerial Systems Task Force. It put together 13 pretty lengthy recommendations. Here are a couple of them. I just share those with you just so you have some awareness of what we're working on in the state. Initially the push from our legislature was airspace restrictions, which we all know are preempted, but sometimes that message doesn't carry a lot of weight in the state. So we put together recommendations that speak to basically the bad actors using UAS potentially for nefarious reasons, but also to keep an eye toward UAS technology as an economic driver versus just something that scares everybody. So there were a couple legislative proposals that got put forward, something called an extension of self principle, which basically would say if something's illegal to do now with your person, i.e., rob a bank, drop things into prisons, there's a state law that's going through the process now that says using a UAS for that same purpose is an extension of yourself and therefore illegal, rather than enacting 400 new laws to outlaw every potential situation. There's some new restrictions on interference with public safety officers. There's been instances with Michigan State Police and fire officials. You guys have all heard those sorts of things. So there's a state law in process to address some of those. It included a recommendation for a UAS IPP submission. And probably the big one from our task force, which was a 30-member industry, academia, governmental organization, was a unified state platform for education outreach of what the rules in the state, both from a federal and a state perspective, are for commercial and hobbyist operators in the state. So that led to the formation of this UAS systems program office within MDOT, which is just being stood up now to push some of that information out. So these next two slides are just my sort of anecdotal, just to let you know a little bit of the things that are going on, and then we've got a brief video that'll show ACM and some of the things going on over there as well. So these were some of the partners that were included in our UAS IPP submission. Obviously, state police has been an industry leader on the law enforcement side, so they continue to push the envelope with the technology that they have and some of the cost savings and efficiencies they realize. Michigan Tech University has been helping MDOT on a number of fronts, one of which is a transportation infrastructure assessment, whether UAS can be a good value add for MDOT in terms of infrastructure, inspection, a variety of other things. Northwest Michigan College, which is up in Traverse City, that probably many have not heard of, is one of the biggest aviation programs in the state. Has focused heavily on the agricultural applicator side of UAS. So they've partnered with our Agriculture and Rural Development Agency to push FAA to establish some training standards for agricultural application as well. Alpena Community College, working with the Michigan Unmanned Aerial Systems Consortium, has also been pushing night flight beyond visual line of sight, all of those hot buzzword type operations in the state of Michigan right now. I guess these are just a couple other sort of interesting developments in the state of Michigan. The top left there is a facility that's referred to as M-Air on the campus of the University of Michigan. It's about a 10,000 square foot, 50 foot high, about 100 by 80 enclosed UAS testing facility operated by the University of Michigan, obviously, doing a lot of interesting testing and development there on the engineering side at University of Michigan. The bottom left picture is one of the products from Michigan Tech's research program with MDOT looking at that's my aviation. Roadway maintenance and whether LiDAR and thermal imaging is an effective tool to monitor pavement deterioration. And on the bottom right there is our current operational UAS unit within MDOT with our photography folks looking at just the media side, but also some of the inspection side on construction projects. And I guess on the top right, as Colin had mentioned a little bit, that's the American Center for Mobility layout. Now this is sort of my personal slant a little bit here that connected autonomous vehicles, huge opportunity for the state of Michigan. I think there's an even bigger opportunity here with facilities like this because it happens to be co-located on the active Willow Run Airport. You can kind of see the runway there on the top right. I think there's a lot of interest in some of the OEMs of partnering between UAS delivery type operations with the autonomous vehicle testing. So a lot of interesting, exciting things happening in Michigan. If you guys are interested, please let us know. We're happy to invite you out, show you around any of these facilities. And I guess with that, we've got some opportunity for questions, but I think we've got a real short video that'll show you some of M-City, some of ACM. Bear with some of the drone parts. It was our IPP sort of promotional video. So,
moving through these halls, you can feel the history that's happened here. Just a few steps from where I'm standing, Rosie the Riveter and thousands of other hardworking Americans built the B-24 bomber. And Charles Lindbergh conducted aerospace design and test flights right here. World-changing innovation continues at this site today. The American Center for Mobility is testing autonomous and connected vehicles on the largest proving grounds in America. Commercial UAVs are being designed, built, and deployed around the world from right here on this property. Michigan is still home to the nation's big three automakers and their research and innovation. Michigan continues to be a leader in the transportation industry, on the ground and in the air.
Planet M is a program with the Michigan Economic Development Corporation where big ideas in mobility are born. We see this as a space where OEMs, startups, and suppliers can come together and innovate. We have done this by creating an epicenter of mobility where business-to-business connections are established. We help to facilitate testing and coordinate deployment of these great technologies. And this all happens here at Planet M in this great state of Michigan.
The next generation of mobility is being created today, right here in Michigan. Come be part of it. If you truly want testing done right, make it move with Michigan.
Okay. All right, so well, thank you very much. We appreciate it. There was one question that came in, and I think it's a great way to end, and it's I think it's very, very appropriate here. So drone and automotive industries each see automation in the other industries as, quote, easier. Which will happen first? Self-driving cars with no human oversight, occupant is reading a newspaper on streets of DC, or an autonomous package delivery drone delivering small packages to citizens of DC. We're not gonna, quote you on this. This is personal opinion, but if each one of the three of you would answer that, I think that would be a great way to end the session.
Yeah, so I think I'll go first so I can take the easy route. I'll leave these guys with the hard one. So I honestly, I don't know which will come first. I think there's an awareness out there, and I can speak only for Michigan, is the vehicles are there today. So they're on our public roads, they're operating, there's still a driver sitting in the driver's seat. A lot of that is because of the legality issues that are still out there, as well as just a comfort level from other passengers on the roadway. So I can tell you they're in full force on the vehicle side. They continue to be more and more advanced. Speaking personally, we were just talking about this earlier today, is I would go in one today. I would go in an autonomous vehicle and I would put both of my children in one. I truly feel that they are safer that way than they are on the road with human drivers. So it's not just distracted driving. There's a lot of other elements that come into that, whether it's, things such as poor choices, just in this context, some of it is just human reaction time. The human just doesn't react fast enough to a lot of situations. We have a lot of people killed on our roads today, in Michigan and across the country, that could be prevented. And when you see the numbers and you're familiar with the technology and all of the testing and things that are happening behind the scenes, I personally can sit here and tell you I would put both of my kids in those today, and one is a driver. So I'll leave that up to you, but I'll let you guys take the hard part.
I mean, I'll be short and sweet. I don't know as much about the regulatory framework around, unmanned aerial systems and package delivery. I do know that, there seems to be a clear path from a regulation perspective for autonomous vehicles, fully automated, driverless potentially. And I think that some of the OEMs have been willing to make claims in regards to how quickly they'll be able to get there. So, I mean, from my perspective, I think you'll see, driverless vehicle operations happen within the next, let's say, 20 years. I don't have enough knowledge about the other space to be able to, talk about that.
So I guess from my perspective, from a realist perspective, having seen them driving down our freeways, I think the autonomous automobile is probably a little bit closer. But I guess I'll put a caveat in there, just sort of from the aviation perspective. Of our aviation offices, separate UAS from airports for a minute, but understand that in the airport side, there's a state block grant program which allows some delegation of authority to a state to invest some of its infrastructure dollars on the airport front. I'm a big believer in that type of system, that there is some value to be gained by including the states in those discussions. I know the whole airspace preemption thing is a can of worms that nobody wants to talk about right now, but I think there's an opportunity with some additional inclusion of the states on the airspace front to help push that forward a little bit. So I think we'll get there.
Good question, and not a surprising answer given who's up on stage. You might have gotten a different answer in some earlier panels. Please, I have to say, this has been exciting. I hope this was as interesting for you as it's been for us to get to know these people here. We went out, and Al and I had a chance to go out and drive all through M-City. We saw the drone test facility in Ann Arbor. It's truly fascinating, and they are doing amazing work. So I really encourage everybody to reach out and learn more about it. We will obviously keep partnership and maybe start to build some more on that going forward. So with that, please join me in a round of applause for these folks for coming so far and being here.